Hey guys, this is Al coming at you with a video describing how to make these histograms. Um, our goal in the end, okay, right, is to have a histogram that looks something like this, okay? But that's not what you have right now. Right now, what you should have is your sum stats sheet. Now, your sum stats sheet should look something like this. Okay, it should look something like this. Now, don't worry, these things are going to be things that we'll add later. Okay, but what you should have right now is column A displaying some data. Okay, in this case here, this is the last data that I worked with, this incomes for USA. Okay, you should have these columns describing the deviation from mean and the absolute deviation from mean, the square deviation from mean. Okay, and remember that these three columns here, we're not so much interested in them in and of themselves, but they're used to calculate these sample statistics. Okay, these the variance here, the standard deviation, the average absolute deviation. All of these, remember, are calculated from these columns. Okay, so that's what you should have right now. If you don't have that, just pause right now and make sure you have exactly what I have showing on the screen here, okay, before we continue. Okay, now, how do we make these histograms? Well, the first thing that we're going to do is, I don't want these three columns distracting me. We're not really going to use these three columns when we make the histogram. So I'm just going to take columns B, C, and D here, and I'm going to right-click them, and I'm going to hide them. Okay, now notice it doesn't affect our calculations. These columns still exist, okay, but they're just hidden from view. If we want to unhide the columns, what we do is we just select the columns that are hidden, okay, right-click and click unhide, and that'll unhide those columns. I'll hide them for now. And then what you want to do is go ahead and type in the labels for some of these values that we're going to be computing. Okay, so here I have a label for histogram, and then we want to just type in, just like I have on the screen, min value, max value, total range, number of bins, and bin width. Okay, we're gonna be filling in these cells. And then over here to the right, okay, I want you to leave a spacer column, so leave this column empty. And then type in three labels here, bin ID, bin left, and bin right. Okay, and then here, leave another spacer column, count left, count right, count, and bin name. Okay, so set that up just like I've done here on the screen. And then finally, since these columns H and L are spacer columns, we're just going to size those down. We're going to size those columns down, and now our table here is kind of formatted in a very readable way. Okay. All right, so let's start filling in these numbers. So the first thing that we need to do in order to create our histogram, okay, is to establish what the total range of our observations is, and then to divide that total range into a number of categories or a number of bins. Okay, so our incomes in this data set, right? There's 100 observations. There's 100 of these numbers. Okay, and we want to know some sense of the distribution. We want to count them. Well, before we count them, we have to identify like what it is that we are counting, right? We could divide this entire population of people into 5 categories and then count the amount in each of those categories, right? We could divide them up into 10 categories and count the number in each one of those. How do we want to divide it up? And that's what we're going to specify right now. Okay, so go ahead and, in order to do this, we first need to identify the minimum value in our data set. Okay, so I'm going to select here, and I'm going to select this cell, I'm going to say enter, and I'm going to, not surprisingly, the function is just min. Okay, so I'm going to say min, and then I'm going to select my entire column, A:(A), close off that parentheses, and type OK. All right, and so you see that this value here, $202, okay, is the smallest income in our entire data set. Okay, there's 100 people here, but the person who makes the least amount of money makes something like $20,000 a year. Okay, well, what about the wealthiest person in our data set? Well, again, I'm going to do this using a function, but this time it's going to be max. And again, I'm going to select my column A over here. Okay, and so the richest person in this data set makes something like $64,000 a year. Okay, so now what is my total range? Right? In other words, what is sort of the span of that whole distance? Well, it's equal to the max value minus the minimum value. Okay, So the incomes in our data set range from something like 20,000 to something like 64,000. So what is that total amount of distance that's covered by those incomes? It's something like 44,000. Okay. And then finally, okay, this is the important part. We need to determine the width of our categories, the width of our bins. Okay. Now the width of the bins is obviously going to depend on the number of bins that we want, because we want to take this entire 44,000 something range and divide it into a number of equal bins. Okay. So for now, we're going to use 20 bins. So I'm going to set the number of bins equal to 20. And that means the width of each bin is going to be this total range divided by the number of bins. So I'm going to specify that here. I'm going to say it's equal to the total range here. I'm going to cell reference that, and I'm going to say it's equal to that divided by the number of bins. Again, the cell reference there. I'm going to press return. Okay. Now, you guys have been asking me about decimal points. Let's use 2 decimal points for now. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce the number of decimal points here to 2. Okay, and you can do that just by clicking these little buttons up here. So, okay, so that's great. So we now have decided that we are going to cut up our data into 20 bins, okay, and each one of those bins will be something like $2,200 across in terms of income, okay. We're going to now actually label, or we're now going to actually create the endpoints of those bins, okay. And the reason that we're going to do this is we're eventually going to be using the COUNTIF function in order to count the number of observations inside each one of these categories. Now, the COUNTIF function, remember, it can count the values that are equal to a particular number, or it can count all of the values which are less than a particular number, or less than or equal to. Okay, but unfortunately, there is no count between function. Okay, and so what we're going to have to do is, if we want to know the number of individuals that make, let's say, between $30,000 a year and $40,000 a year, we're going to first have to count everybody who makes less than $40,000 a year, and then subtract the people who make less than $30,000 a year. And what we'll be left with is a number of people who make between $30,000 and $40,000 a year. Okay, so what I'm about to show you guys is going to achieve all of that. Okay, so let's start with the easy part. We're going to start with the bin ID here. Okay, there's going to be 20 bins, so my bin ID is going to go from 1 to 20. So I'll type in the first few numbers, and then Excel is going to figure out the rest. Okay, if you just type in a few numbers and then take that box and pull it down, you'll see that it gives you a little shortcut here, and then you want to make that go all the way up to 20. Okay, all right. So then this bin left and bin right column are simply going to be the values, the positions, the income amounts corresponding to our bins. And in this case, our first bin, the leftmost bin, okay, is going to have a minimum value, the left endpoint of that bin, okay, is going to have the minimum value of our whole data set, something like $20,000. And then the other endpoint, the right endpoint of that bin, okay, is simply going to be that minimum value plus the bin width, okay, because that's one bin's worth of width in there, okay. So the bin left here, so I'm going to say equals, okay, and then I'm simply going to cell reference this minimum value here. I'm going to cell reference that minimum value, okay. And then for the bin right, I'm going to say, well, that's equal to whatever our left endpoint is plus the width of the bin itself, this number here. Okay, and then I should probably go ahead and switch this to a absolute cell reference. So we're going to be filling these formulas down. So I'm going to switch this bin width here to an absolute cell reference. So I'm going to press Command T on the Mac, F4 on the keyboard. Okay, so there we go. So there's that width. Okay, so that's our first bin. Okay, it's going to go from something like 20 to 22. Okay, now our next bin is going to begin right where our previous bin ended. Okay, so the new for our second bin, the endpoint here is simply going to be the left endpoint of the previous bin. Okay, so it's simply going to be this value. So I'm gonna simply cell reference this value over here. Whoops, cell reference. If you ever mess up, okay, just press escape. It'll get you out of the box and it won't save the changes. So again, I'm saying that this is simply equal to that value over there. Okay, and then I can use the same formula. I can simply fill down. Okay, the same formula is going to say, okay, what's my new right endpoint is equal to my left endpoint, again, plus the width of one of the bits. Okay, so then I'm simply going to update both of these columns down. So I'm going to drag both of these columns down. Okay, and you see what it's done for us is basically kept following these rules. It keeps following these rules, okay, and it constructs a set of 20 bins. Now notice that the beginning, the left endpoint of the first bin is equal to our minimum value, right here. It's equal to 202, right? And then this right endpoint, okay, is equal to our maximum value, this 64,000 figure. Okay, so between these 20 bins, we've captured the entire range of our data. Every single one of these observations, okay, is going to fall into one of these 20 categories.